Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Market Watch. We're evaluating wide receivers and tight end values in 2025 drafts. This episode, we're going to get into that ADP for these positions. Tyreek Hill, we're at Rashee Rice, Godwin, Jonnu Smith, bunch of other players. We'll analyze whether they're undervalued or overvalued and how you can handle those players in your fantasy football drafts. Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by Pool Genius and Edge Boost. I'm Jim Coventry, joined by Anthony Cervino. And again, in today's show, we're going to examine the early ADP market for wide receivers and tight ends. Now, if you missed that show with the quarterbacks and the running backs, that'll be on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast feed a week prior. So make sure you catch that one as well. All ADP, we get it from my friends over at fantasymojo.com. Darren Armani spearheads that. FFPC high stakes data lasts 7 days. We go, since that's a tight end premium, we go by position number, like tight end 1, tight end 2, because we don't, when people are drafting non-tight end premium, you don't want to mess up the rounds and things like that. But this is universal no matter what size league you're in, so it works well. And realistically, just check out fantasymojo.com. If you need high stakes data, it's the best in the biz. All right, Anthony, we are starting out with Nico Collins, wide receiver 8. Now, the first thing, you can't talk about Nico Collins unless you talk about missed time. Every season of his career, Anthony, he's missed time. He missed 17 total games in his career, 5 games last year, 7 back in 2022. It's a problem. Now, we've seen him at his best. We saw him in 2023 take off. We saw even this year through week 4, averaging 7.5 catches, 122 yards, 11 targets, and a half a touchdown. Comes back from the injury, misses 5 weeks with the hamstring. Comes back, no more 11 targets, down to 8. They lost players. Stephon Diggs was gone. All of a sudden, the magic wasn't there. Now, I will say, after that return, Collins averaged 60 or fewer yards in 5 of his last 7 games. That's what he had. And the NFL playoffs, Anthony, was a sign of life. He came out with 101 yards and an average in the NFL playoffs. On those 2 games, he showed he was kind of able to do that. After the catch, 77th percentile. But here's the deal, Anthony. He's going as wide receiver 8. With the injury history, and I love Nico Collins, I cannot do it. I have him as a wide receiver 2 because of the missed time. What are your thoughts on Nico Collins?
Yeah, I'm very high on Nico Collins. And if you see Nico Collins play, he has the ability to take over a game. I think if we could be sure, and I know it's impossible, that he can stay healthy, I think he's a locked and loaded top 5 fantasy receiver.
Oh, yeah.
And his ADP's reflecting that. But the injury history is a big-time concern. 12 games last year, 15 the year before that, 10 games played before that, 14 before that. So you're right. Every single year he's missed time. And where we're drafting him, I can't bite that bullet. Now, if you play volume leagues, I get it. You're going to want to get your hands on some Nico Collins. But if you're a fantasy player that might play, 2 or 3 leagues, then it is best to go with somebody a little bit safer with your first pick, because that first pick is a building block.
100% of that. So I'm in the same boat. And I've been on Nico Collins since his rookie year. Yep. But again, the draft cost now is prohibitive. So unfortunately, we're going to be out on him. Certainly, like Anthony said, if you're in volume, you do want to throw a dart here and there, because he was in line to be the wide receiver 1 last year. Yeah. He was playing better than Jamar Chase. But again, it was a small sample. He could have kept it up, but the injury, and that was that. All right, Lad McConkey, Anthony, he's going off the board as wide receiver 12. And I think there's a few important things we have to look at here. First of all, yeah, his role expanded in the second half of the season, that's for sure. And he has about 1,149 yards, 7 touchdowns, 112 targets. Nobody can argue with that. 68th percentile yard after the catch. Beautiful. But here's the thing, Anthony. Through week 10, he averaged 6 targets. Now, you might say he was growing into the NFL. That's possible. But in those last 8 games, from 6 targets up to 9 targets. Why? Well, remember, first of all, we saw J.K. Dobbins miss a month, and they only had Gus Edwards, who was terrible. So they passed more. They definitely passed a lot more down the stretch. So there was that. Now, McConkey's yardage with the receptions just started going through the roof. He had at least 83 yards in 6 of his last 7 games with 4 touchdowns. So the last we remember is, oh my goodness, this is a player we want to definitely move the board. But Anthony, they bring in Najee Harris. And we talked about Najee Harris in last week's show. Yeah. He hasn't missed a game in his career. And he might not be Superman, but he keeps an offense on schedule. And we know Greg Roman wants to run heavy personnel. They want to play defense, and they want to run the ball. If we're betting on McConkey, we're betting that the running game is going to be a disaster. They're going to have to throw him those 9 targets a game, but that's not their identity. And at wide receiver 12, that is really ambitious, Anthony. Thoughts?
Yeah, I'm really high on Ladd McConkey, one of the more productive rookie wide receivers in a class full of productive rookie wide receivers. The low volume passing offense is concerning. And I think you bringing up Najee Harris when assessing Ladd McConkey, I think that's important. And I haven't heard many people do that yet, because unlike J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards and the rest of the backfield last year, we know what Najee Harris can handle when it comes to not only a runner, but he's a very underrated receiver out of the backfield. I think they also, and no, they actually did bring in Tyler Conklin, who can also handle roughly 70 targets a year if he works as the tight end 1 in this offense. They still have.
Sorry about that.
They still have Will Dissly. They brought back Mike Williams. I know Mike Williams was an empty last season, but he still has that rapport with Justin Herbert. And I don't think they're done adding at wide receiver, folks. Here's a hot take. Would not shock me if Keenan Allen finished his career with this team.
You know what? And he wants to go there. Keenan Allen had already said that I either want to go to the Chargers or I want to go to the Bears. Now, Keenan Allen is not tied to Jim Harbaugh at all. But if somebody like Keenan Allen walks in and Justin Herbert says, you know what, I'd kind of like to have him.
Yeah.
He's going to be cheap. They probably would be able to bring him in. And here's why the Bears probably don't bring him back, Anthony. Because right now, Keenan Allen, as of this recording, is a free agent. But the thing is, with Ben Johnson, remember, Ben Johnson ran a high level of heavy personnel in Detroit. It wasn't 3-receiver city. And the Bears have 2 receivers, so they don't really need a third. A third is a luxury for them. This is going to be heavy base offense. So I think Keenan Allen won't end up there. So I like that call that Keenan Allen could end up, and that would really be a drag. Even if he gets 3 targets a game, those could definitely ding in the impact of what McConkey could have. Yeah. So Anthony, in or out at ADP of wide receiver 12 on McConkey?
At his cost, I'm going to say that I'm out on Ladd McConkey.
Yeah. Yes, it's very aggressive. All right, let's go to our next wide receiver. Tyreek Hill still coming in at wide receiver 13. Now, we know last year he was wide receiver 2 or 3 and definitely understood that. Well, Hill had his worst season since his rookie year in 2016. 959 yards, 6 touchdowns, only 123 targets because he was getting 170 a year. Now, here's the thing. He had that wrist injury, right? And had to have surgery. So the wrist injury was no little thing, but that shouldn't have affected his yards after the catch. Tyreek Hill's yards after the catch, 38th percentile. This is a guy we see in the 90s year after year after year. That is a little bit of a trouble sign. Hill is going to be 31 years old this season. We even saw it last year before the wrist was a problem. Tua Tagovailoa underthrows him on deep passes all the time. Tyreek used to come back, jump over 2 defenders, grab the ball, said, I'm still running with it. Well, last year, Tyreek had lost a nano step, which means he no longer was able to come in, run backwards, jump over 2 receivers and grab the ball. I think that's gone. And if that's gone and Tua can't get him the ball deep and defenses know they're going to throw short, Hill's going to get another year older. I love him. I don't think I could touch him at wide receiver 13 because I don't trust Tua. I think Tyreek's aging, and to me, it's a problem.
Yeah, if you look at the players that are going around Tyreek Hill, because draft position and cost does matter. Guys like T. Higgins, even running backs like Chase Brown, Kyron Williams, Terry McLaurin, depending on your build, you might want to look elsewhere and get somebody with a little bit more consistency. Eventually, age and injuries are going to catch up to Tyreek Hill, and we may have seen that. And last year, you noted time and time again, Jim, that the NFL, it caught up to Mike McDaniel's offense, and the adjustment was underneath work to Devin Achane and Jonnu Smith.
And so where are we at, right? And you still got Tua with a pop gun arm. That's a problem. And it's not like they're going to get another quarterback in there. So yeah, I have Tyreek at wide receiver 18. I probably should have him lower, but my goodness, he's Tyreek Hill. It's hard, but at that cost, I'll never get him because he's the wide receiver 13. Even if he falls, not falling to 18. So I think it sounds like we are both out on him at cost, correct?
Yeah.
We're the negative Nellies today. We're down on everybody. That's right. Maybe things will change. Hang with us. Edge Boost. Have you ever had your debit card declined or had to call your bank at 3 a.m. in Vegas? Edge Boost is the first consumer-facing online bank dedicated to the gaming industry. There are numerous benefits of using Edge Boost. $250K per day in debit deposits, unlimited withdrawals, cash back on sports betting, DFS, and sweeps. You deposit $25, you get $25. 100% approval for all gaming activity, financial segmentation and discretion for responsible gaming, compatible today for prediction markets, iCasino, DFS, sports betting, lottery, brick and mortar casinos, horse racing, and sweeps. They've got you covered. No transaction reviews or account freezes. Here's how you get in. You visit edgeboost.bet today, and you use the code ROTOPOD. So again, edgeboost.bet and the code ROTOPOD. Anthony Cervino, we are now talking Rashee Rice, and I'm worried the negative Nelly's going to continue, but maybe you'll break that trend for us. Rashee Rice is going off the board at wide receiver 21. And in a vacuum, that sounds like a wonderful cost. Now, remember, October surgery, LCL knee injury. Andy Reid said as of February 5th, just a while ago, that the recovery is going well. Good sign for next year. Legal update. This comes from a few weeks ago, March 6th. Remember, Rashee Rice had that incident a year ago. So that case cannot be heard until July. The Texas legislature has a law that forbids continuing civil and criminal cases until 30 days after a legislative session is adjourned. Their one ends in June 2nd. So we won't get any leak of anything until at least July. And that throws a lot of doubt. Now, in terms of production, Rashee Rice was insanely good in his few games he played. Average 8 catches, 96 yards, 10 targets, 2/3 of a touchdown. Yards after the catch, 96th percentile. His yards per depth of target, that went up from his rookie year, from 9.2 to 9.9. Even PPR scoring, 17.3 to 29 in all 3 games. He looked like he was going to be the steal of the draft, and then the knee injury. Now, while he was gone, Xavier Worthy definitely became a thing in that offense. Small player, but he definitely got featured late in the season, so he'll have a role. Hollywood Brown, sternoclavicular injury, he missed most of the season. The team made it a priority to bring him back. Wide receiver 21's a tempting cost, but we don't know if he'll miss time. Thoughts on Rashee Rice?
I'm in on Rashee Rice, and I get they have Xavier Worthy and Kelsey's coming back to bring back Hollywood Brown, but when Rashee Rice is on the field, he very much looks like the number 1 pass catcher in that offense. This Chiefs offense is going to be different this year. They're going to have to throw the football. We saw the defense take a little bit of a step back. I don't know how much protection Patrick Mahomes is going to get, and I don't know if they're going to be able to run the football as effectively as they did a few years ago, even with a healthy Isaiah Pacheco. Rashee Rice, he plays the underneath a little bit. We've seen him when he's healthy in the screen game. I'm going to buy into Rashee Rice. I do think it is a concern, obviously, that he could miss time with the suspension, but as his current cost, he's one wide receiver I'm going to buy in on.
And I'm one spot ahead of market. I'm at wide receiver 20, and it's all because of the uncertainty with, the legal situation. I mean, and maybe he gets it and he gets 1 game. Who knows? But maybe he gets 8. The uncertainty gets me nervous. But like you said, Anthony, you probably have a wide receiver 1 on your hands, and you're getting him at a mid-range wide receiver 2 cost, even a low end. So it is worth taking a shot. If you're in a lot of drafts, I wouldn't draft him in every draft, because if the uncertainty swings the wrong way, it would hurt a lot of your rosters. But definitely, if you got a portfolio, Rashee Rice in that portfolio would be a very, very wise investment. All right, Anthony, let's move to our next receiver. Chris Godwin, one of my favorites ever, wide receiver 29. Now, remember, last year, Liam Cohen was running the offense. I said in the preseason, I said that if they use Godwin in any of those Sean McVay concepts, that's where Liam Cohen had come from. I said, Godwin is in for a heck of a great season. And he was. He was on his pace to another 1,000-yard season, but he dislocated his ankle in week 7. Now, there was only one game that Godwin wasn't targeted at least 9 times. If he was healthy the whole season, he could have flirted with that 1,333 yards, 9 touchdown season he had in 2019. He was that good. And short and intermediate routes definitely was the place where he loves to prosper. Blocks, gets open quickly. He had very high production, at least 11.6 PPR points in every game he played, 22 points in 3 of 7 games. He was great. Now, here's the thing. Liam Cohen's gone. And I understand Josh Grizzard got promoted. Anthony, these promotions always worry me because it's never the guy behind him. It's like, that's not Liam Cohen. He saw Cohen do some things, but it's the play calling. It's how you feel the rhythm of the game and the call. And these guys don't usually have that. Now, Godwin's role should be firmly established. He'll play a lot on the inside, but he'll also play outside. They play 71% 3 receiver sets. So Godwin will be a full-time player. Jalen McMillan will play a lot too. I think 29 at wide receiver, that's way too low. I think Chris Godwin is a steal. I got him at wide receiver 21. So for me, like I did last year, I'm all over Chris Godwin. How about you?
Yeah, I'm also very much in on Chris Godwin. I'm also worried that Liam Cohen is not there, but we also have seen this offense thrive, and primarily Baker Mayfield at quarterback, from Dave Canales to Liam Cohen. Sure, there might be a little bit of a drop-off because this offense was very prolific last year, but we also saw Chris Godwin go back into that power slot role where he thrives, and I don't see the new play caller moving him out of that too much. Because they run so many 3 wide receiver sets, there is also room here for Jalen McMillan to also be on the field and productive. And this Tampa defense, they lost some pieces this offseason. It was also a liability, especially early last season. So once again, we're probably looking at an offense that's going to have to score the football to stay in games and win games, which means there should be plenty of opportunities for Chris Godwin to, I think, smash this ADP.
Yeah, totally agree on that. I wouldn't reach 2 rounds on him, but I would definitely make sure by the time we get to that 5th round, I would start having eyes on Chris Godwin if you need receiver help, because like Anthony, I do think he's going to have another outstanding season. A horrible Grizzly injury he had, but it wasn't one of those injuries that typically you can't come back from. So I think it wasn't a knee. It was dislocated ankle, and it's Grizzly, but he should be able to come back from it. I think he would be fine in that case. Our next player, Anthony, Jaylen Waddle, has gone all the way down to wide receiver 34. Thank you, Mike McDaniel. Really appreciate you. Look, Waddle had the worst season of his career, and it wasn't close. He was his lowest production across the board in all major categories. 744 yards. That was 270 less than any other season. 58 catches. The worst he had before that was 72. He averaged 6 touchdowns his first 3 seasons. He had 2. He averaged 121 targets the last 3 years. 83 last year. It was a disaster. 65th percentile yards after the catch was good. Here's the problem. We mentioned this with the Tyreek Hill bit. That defenses basically said, we're packing it in. And you mentioned earlier, you reminded us that it was just screens to Devon Achane and it was screens to Jonnu Smith. Jaylen Waddle was the odd man out. He only hit 9.3 PPR points 3 times all season. Disaster. But this is going to be narrative, Anthony. First of all, we have seen Jaylen Waddle play at a near elite level. We have seen it with our own eyes. It was not a fluke. Mike McDaniel may not have had a counterpunch last year, but he's a pretty intelligent man. And I think he has to realize that they're a long off season. You're not winning games by dumping the ball to Jonnu Smith and by dumping it to Devon Achane. Great players, but you're winning by getting the ball to Jaylen Waddle and probably Tyreek Hill. It's narrative. I understand. If you don't buy the narrative, don't jump in. But I have to think Mike McDaniel spent much of the offseason thinking, how do we make Jaylen Waddle part of the solution and not part of the problem? My narrative, but at wide receiver 34, it doesn't take a big stretch for me to draft him at wide receiver 28 or 30. Thoughts?
I'm a little bit more skittish on Jaylen Waddle. Now, this is a player we know in years past, he was a 2nd-round pick. He was a 3rd-round pick. But he isn't returning value whether it's the offense, whether it's injuries, he's not getting targets. I have a lot of red flags on on Jaylen Waddle here. And at his current cost, I just think there's better players going around him that I'd rather draft. It might sound crazy, but Jerry Jeudy is going right around Jaylen Waddle. And I get we don't know the quarterback situation in Cleveland, but Jeudy really got going last year with somebody like Jameis Winston. I can see a world where the Browns maybe trade for Kirk Cousins, or even if they draft a rookie quarterback, they'll be hyper targeting Jerry Jeudy. I think there could be more consistent targets going in Jerry Jeudy's direction, which is, in a player like that, I'd rather have over Waddle, who seems very boom or bust.
It's hard to argue with that. It definitely, like I said, you'll hear me I'll give you very reasonable researched advice. And I told you it was a little more narrative in my Waddle end than I like. And so I definitely think that if you don't buy the narrative like Anthony, then step out, because there is not quantifiable information coming out of last year that makes you say, buy Jaylen Waddle. All right, we'll be back with more wide receivers we perceive as mispriced after we take a short break. All right, Jakobi Meyers, Anthony, comes in at wide receiver 42. And look, the NFL draft hasn't happened yet, and I can't tell you I know what the Raiders are going to do, but I do know this. Not only did Meyers have a career year last year, 87 catches, 1,027 yards, and 4 touchdowns. He had 129 targets, Anthony. But he wasn't bad from 2020 to 2023. He was averaging 800 yards and 4 touchdowns. And those were on some bad teams. Now he'll be on a bad team again, so there's that. But he has been a very solid player. And not much of a threat with the ball in his hands, 37th percentile yards to catch. But he's a very, very reliable possession receiver. And last year, obviously, his numbers went way up after Devontae Adams injured his hamstring. Not sure about that really was a thing. And then he got traded. So Meyers took off after that. But the whole point is this. Realistically, outside of Brock Bowers, who's going to be right there at the top of the food chain, Trey Tucker is their wide receiver too. Well, he's not commanding targets.
Yeah.
Jakobi Meyers will, in the current state of this offense, get plenty of targets. Now, if the Raiders surprise us and spend an early pick and they hit on a wide receiver, that's going to be a problem for Meyers. But as of today, wide receiver 42 in a PPR league, there is very little chance he finishes outside the top 36. Anthony?
Yeah, I'm absolutely in on Jakobi Meyers. And if you go back through, his career, once he started getting going, he's been a very under the radar, underrated wide receiver. Past 2 seasons, top 24 in fantasy points per game in PPR. He doesn't miss a lot of time. And as you said, this is a very, very weak wide receiver room. Trey Tucker's a nice player, but he's not going to command targets away from Jakobi Meyers. The only player on the roster right now who will do so is Brock Bowers. And what do we know about Geno Smith? Geno Smith played his best football in garbage time. And in Las Vegas, there should be plenty of garbage time for Geno Smith to rack up those yards to guys like Jakobi Meyers. So I'm all in on Jakobi Meyers.
Vegas, the town of catching up, trying to cut your losses and chase after them. And that's what the Raiders will continue to do in 2025. But yeah, Brock Bowers will be the magnet. But like you said, Jakobi Meyers, Geno Smith, I'm going to bank that PPR volume. I'm very excited about that. Let's go down the food chain a little bit here, Anthony. We're going to Indianapolis. I know not exactly an exciting place to search for wide receivers because of the quarterback play. But that said, they got Daniel Jones, they got Anthony Richardson. But the wide receiver we're talking about here is Josh Downs. Wide receiver 50. To me, blatant disrespect. No matter who this guy's had a quarterback, he has played great. Whether it was Flacco, whether it was Anthony Richardson. Last year, Josh Downs missed 3 games. Yet in this garbage offense, 72 catches, 803 yards, and 5 touchdowns. He was being drafted around wide receiver 60 last year. Now, moving up 10 spots, missing 3 games of that production, yet still a value. Yards after the catch, 79th percentile. No surprise there. The beauty of Josh Downs is this. He plays the slot, and Indy plays the slot 75-ish% of the time. So he doesn't get as many snaps as we like, but he plays about 70% of the time. So he's on the field a lot, enough for the draft cost, right? But he can win deep. He could seam stretch the slot. He could be a possession receiver. He can run those crossing routes extremely well. He's whatever he needs his quarterback to be. And that kind of versatility is rare. And that said, Downs had at least 15 PPR points in half of his games with bad quarterback play. And he only had 4 times when he failed to hit 6.2. So most of the time for his draft class, he was getting you something. Now, I don't know if Anthony Richards is going to play. I don't know if Daniel Jones is going to play. They're both bad. Daniel Jones, Anthony, as bad as he is, completes about 62% of his passes. Last year, Richardson was under 50%. In terms of just sheer PPR volume, Jones might be better. I'm sorry I said that, but it is what it is. Yeah. Anyway, all that said, there's no way at wide receiver 50 I'm letting Josh Downs get past me. Thoughts?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. When you have Josh Downs at wide receiver 50, and then you have Michael Pittman going not too far behind him, it's not a question to me. I get Michael Pittman had that big year 2 years ago, but it looks like Josh Downs is not only the player you want in fantasy, he might be the best wide receiver on that football team. He has, if I could even say this, it seems like there is a little bit of a spark here with Anthony Richardson, but I do agree with you. Daniel Jones, if he has protection, I think he's a better quarterback than what people think. Because last year, if you remember in New York, when Andrew Thomas, when he was healthy, Daniel Jones, Neighbors, they were playing some pretty decent football. It was after the Andrew Thomas injury, the offensive line and the Giants fell apart. Daniel Jones was benched. If this Colts offensive line can get back to where it was a few years ago, they had a lot of injuries last year, Daniel Jones the starter, all of a sudden this offense is going to be better than what people think, and Josh Downs is going to be a big part of it. So wide receiver 50, I'm in.
Absolutely. Now, I do want to point out the offseason has not been kind to the Indianapolis offensive line. Center Ryan Kelly, and I know he hadn't played great the last 2 seasons, but he's no longer with the team. They're going to move on to Tanner Bortoloni, and right guard Will Freeze, who was very, very good. He was also gone in free agency, and they're bringing in Dalton Tucker, who I haven't really seen much of. So, but they still have Braden Smith and Bernard Raymond at the tackles. They still got Quentin Nelson. So there's a little bit to work on there. So hopefully it's not a horrible downgrade, but I do think the line, like you're saying, is good enough to get them some protection. Anthony, let's go with one more wide receiver here. Wide receiver 55, Marvin Mims. Sean Payton cracks me up. Rookie year for Mims. Oh, we're going to get this guy involved. We're going to get him involved. Never got him involved. Beginning of the year last year, we're going to get this guy involved. Didn't get him involved. Well, through week 10, Mims through 10 weeks, 11 catches, so 1 catch a week, 69 yards, 19 targets. Thanks, Sean Payton. Well, guess what? Sean Payton fixed it. Finally. Took him a year and a half. Week 11 on. Mims goes at least 44 yards in 6 of his last 7 games with 6 touchdowns. 99th percentile yards after the catch. What changed? So they did take some deep shots. Remember that Cincinnati game? Took some deep shots. But the key was bubble screens. Very well blocked bubble screens. And that's why the 99th percentile yard after the catch was in play for Marvin Mims, because he is dynamic with the ball in his hands. Sean Payton is amazing at crafting an offense. Took him a year and a half, but he finally got there. Now, like I said, as a rookie, when Mims was used slightly, it was all downfield. But now this usage is much better. The targets still aren't great, Anthony. He was only getting about 4 targets a game. So but he was making the most of them. They're high percentage. The bubble screens are super high percentage. That target share's got to go up a little bit. But what he shows at the end of the season, I only have to think Sean Payton realizes we're going to expand his role a little bit more. At wide receiver 55, are you in and out? I'm in.
I'm very much buying in on Marvin Mims. Over 19 PPR points in 3 out of his last 5 games. He was being used correctly. I remember he was being used in the backfield. He has field stretching speed. Mm-hmm. This was a player that Sean Payton, I believe, traded up to get in the NFL draft. He could be, I don't want to say a joker, but more of a hybrid player used all over the formation. And this is also an offense, a wide receiver room. They didn't really make any type of improvements this offseason. And Mims is projected to probably be the wide receiver 2 right now. And at this cost, I'm expecting this Broncos offense to get better this year. And if Sean Payton uses Marvin Mims to start the year the way they used him down the stretch, Marvin Mims could be a big-time breakout candidate in fantasy football. I think if he is used the way that they use him down the stretch, we could be looking at a top 30 wide receiver we're drafting outside the top 50 wideouts.
Yeah, we just got to get that target share up a little bit. But like you said, I mean, Peyton has to be excited with the results he had. And I also like that they brought in Evan Ingram because Evan Ingram is somebody the defense has to account for. Realistically, it was Cortland Sutton. And we saw in the NFL playoffs, they knew the bubble screens were coming. And so I'm trying to remember that first round opponent. I wish I could. I'm sorry I don't. But they ganged up on those short passes. And Buffalo. And Buffalo ganged up on him. And he couldn't get anything going. Well, Buffalo got nothing. And Buffalo stymied them completely. So Denver got nothing going. But that said, if you bring Ingram in there, it's another person for defenses to worry about. And that I think that only helps Marvin Mims' cause. Hey, pool genius. You want to win more in your golf and football pools? Pool Genius gives you data-driven picks and strategies to outsmart the competition. With over a decade of analytics and historical data, Pool Genius is the only site dedicated exclusively to helping people win sports pools. With Pool Genius, users winning 3 times more often than expected is what you should expect. RotoWire listeners get exclusive offers. You visit poolgenius.com/RotoWire for up to 55% off or start a 4 free-day trial. Again, poolgenius.com/RotoWire. Anthony, tight ends. Got to get to them at some point. We've talked Miami Dolphins show today. We talked a little Tyreek Hill, talked a little Jaylen Waddle. Jonnu Smith is the tight end 6, and he deserves that ranking. Based on what we saw last year, definitely deserves it. And for those who don't remember, Jonnu Smith's last season in Atlanta, he played well. He had 50 catches, 582 yards on 70 targets. And that's with Kyle Pitts there at the time. That was a good season. And then Miami gets him. Now, first 4 games, Jonnu Smith did nothing. And he wasn't drafted in most leagues. In those 4 games, he had 3 catches, 19 yards. He averaged that. It was 3 for 19. Didn't do much. Well, all of a sudden, he exploded. 6 games with at least 19.8 PPR points, double-digit PPR in 10 of 12 games. He has 84 catches, 884 yards, 111 targets, and 8 touchdowns. He was a league winner off the waiver wire for most. Here's the thing. 78th percentile for the catch. We knew he was always an athlete. And we said earlier, we went over it twice. Tua would dump the ball to him, and defense would worry about Tyreek. They were worried about Waddle, and Jonnu had room to run. Now he's 29 years old, so I don't think age is an issue at all. I still have to think, and I'm going back to that narrative, though. Are Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle going to still see suppressed targets? Waddle at 82. Tyreek Hill was in the 120s, normally a 170 guy. If those targets stay there, Jonnu Smith can do that. But if they fix the targets for either Hill or Waddle, they're going to come at Jonnu's expense. I think we're drafting him at ceiling. I understand if you want to take him. I think it's a trap. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm with you. It's a little bit too high for Jonnu Smith. And the tight end position overall, and normally I'm a fantasy player, I like to wait on tight end. And last year, I was enamored by these early tight end values of Kelsey falling. And it was one of my worst fantasy seasons because I veered off my normal strategy of wait to draft the tight end. And I think Jonnu Smith falls into what you call a trap because there is no guarantee he sees the same volume and usage. It's not like Tyreek Hill and or Jaylen Waddle are no longer on the roster. They're still here, and we know their capability of taking over a game and taking over an offense, not to mention Devin Achane is still there and the usage he had in the passing game. If Jonnu Smith was a few rounds cheaper, fine. I will take my shots on Jonnu Smith, but at his current cost, I can't do it.
Yeah, I'd love to, but yeah, I'm out. I just can't do that. Yeah, and that price was always going to happen because fantasy football is a very reactionary hobby, and I think we're seeing the reaction, definitely that. And that said, let's move on to another tight end, Anthony. One of our favorite players. We both love this guy, Mark Andrews, the tight end 7. He'll be 30 this year, Anthony. Mark Andrews had one of the weirdest productive tight end seasons I've ever seen. I mean, listen to all this stuff I'm going to spew at you. 673 yards and 11 touchdowns. That was beautiful. Those 11 touchdowns, Anthony, came on 55 catches. And I'm not a big math guy, but that's 1 in 5. 20% of his catches were touchdowns. That doesn't happen. 69 targets. That's not a lot of targets. Very low target total. 4.1 per game. Now, air yards, we know this. He is the seam stretcher. 89th percentile. And that's what he's always been to Lamar Jackson. So that's a beautiful thing. but Mark Andrews, Anthony, did not have more than 68 yards in any game. I know that sounds like it's a big number, but the fact he didn't have yardage, those touchdowns drove it. Now, I want to point out a couple more things. Starting the season, this is why his season was so weird. Remember, he had the off-season car accident, which wasn't talked about a lot, but it had to make an impact. He definitely was hurting that. And then he had the broken ankle or whatever from the prior season. He did play in the AFC playoffs that prior year, but he probably wasn't right from that. So anyway, through first 4 games, a total of 6 catches, 65 yards. People were cutting him. Some people cut him. Some people benched him. And it was from week 5 on. He did almost all of his production from that point on. So that said, Anthony, the 1 in 5 catches for touchdowns, that is unsustainable. I don't know what to do with that. I love Mark Andrews, but if those targets are going to stay that low, it's going to be hard to remain that super efficient. Now, tight end 7 is kind of a cheaper price because you already got the elite options out. And I already have a draft where I've collected Andrews and put him on my roster. But I don't want to go out of my draft saying I have to have Mark Andrews at that cost. What are your thoughts on Andrews?
I find myself, whether it's FFPC, it's tight end premium, or, the underdog best ball drafts, I find myself buying into Mark Andrews once again because I see Andrews falling another player or two. Like I'm seeing Jonnu go over Mark Andrews. I'm even seeing David and Njoku going over Mark Andrews, and he's falling to a spot to where, hey, maybe the volume's not going to be there, but this is one of the few times I'm willing to buy into the touchdown and chase the touchdown inconsistency because we can never rely on them. But when we've talked about this off air and possibly even on an earlier show, when you have an offense in the red zone with Mark Andrews, Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson, who's the enemy defense going to focus on? They're not focusing on Mark Andrews. I'm sorry, folks. They are just not with Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson. And last year, we saw Mark Andrews. He was 8th in red zone targets, but that's not all he does well. He was 3rd in deep targets. He was one of the more efficient downfield tight ends. And once again, I do think the impact of Henry and Lamar Jackson isn't just in the red area. It's all over the football field because if you try to double Mark Andrews, you still have Zay Flowers, Bateman, who had a big year. This entire offense in the passing game, I don't think it's as prolific last year without the impact of Derrick Henry.
There's no way you're doubling Mark Andrews because if you do that, you know what else is going to happen? Lamar's going to take off. There's one less defender for him to worry about.
So I'm fine at this cost. It's not like we're paying 2nd or 3rd tight end off the board like we did in years past. We're looking at 7th, maybe 8th, depending on who you're drafting with, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah, the price is very good. Definitely is very good. If those targets drop anymore and those touchdowns, like he just has an off touchdown here, that's the only thing that could sting us. But like you said, there's really not a reason. His floor is going to be solid as it is. He'll be enough. Even if the targets drop, he is still Mark Andrews downfield, seam structure. All right, let's go to Dalton Kincaid going off the board, tight end 12. So, look, a couple of years ago, Kincaid comes in the league. Remember that whole class of tight ends comes in. We think we're set for a decade with this great class. Well, Kincaid had some serious regression last year, Anthony. 44 catches, 448 yards, 2 touchdowns. First 8 games, 3 times he goes 11 to 13 PPR points. It's okay. Nobody was excited about it because he was getting drafted like tight end 6 last year. But after week 8, Anthony, he didn't have another 10-point PPR performance in his last 8 games. That's how bad it was. He was dropping the ball. 33rd percentile of drops, terrible. He had short targets, and he only caught 58% of his passes. Again, 9th percentile. Terrible. He didn't have more than 53 yards in a game, although he did hit 46 times. Here's the thing, Anthony. He played 70% of the snaps in 5 of the first 9 games, which was okay. But then at the end of the season, when he kind of already realized he wasn't playing well, he lost a lot of snaps. Kincaid played 41% of the snaps in the last 3 games, while Dawson Knox played 59. And I don't think that was an accident. I know that Kincaid had an injury. I think that he was hurting the team. And I think at that point, all right, Knox can block for us. If he has to catch something, fine. But why are we going to feature Kincaid if he can't catch the ball? I am out on him at tight end 12. I think he got force-fed the ball early in his career. He may not be the prince that was promised. Thoughts?
Yeah, this is another player we completely agree on. Dalton Kincaid, tight end 12. If he falls, sure, maybe I'll throw some darts because, 2023, 2024, he averaged right around the same amount of targets per game. It was 5.7 and 5.8. The targets were there. I'm fine with that. But the production wasn't. And the alarming thing, as you noted, Dawson Knox. They also went out and sure, Mark Cooper didn't do anything, but I think it was telling that they had to go out and trade for a wide receiver. If Dawson Knox was doing the job they drafted him to do, I don't know if they're making moves to bring in wide receivers. So I can't bite that bullet on a tight end position that I feel is extremely deep. Going right behind Dalton Kincaid is Evan Ingram in what I feel is a prime slam dunk situation with Bo Nix and the Denver Broncos. Tight end we'll talk about soon, Jake Ferguson. And if you really just want to punt tight end like I normally do, guys like Hunter Henry, Cade Otton, Cole Kmet, Mike Gesicki in the back. Like I just don't want to spend that draft capital on Dalton Kincaid. He's one of those players. Before I buy it, I need to see him do it. He's like Kyle Pitts territory for me.
Yes, that's toxic. Do not touch. Avoid at all costs. Yeah, not good. Let's do one more, Anthony. You mentioned Jake Ferguson, tight end 15. And we said earlier in the show, fantasy football is highly reactive. Jake Ferguson missed 3 games last year, so it wasn't much, fine. But remember, a lot of that season, about half of it was played with Cooper Rush at quarterback. So 59 catches, 494 yards, no touchdowns. 60th percentile after the catch, though. He was still very good, like we kind of knew he was. Here's the whole point. Dak Prescott's coming back. And look, you never know if somebody's staying healthy or not. I get that. But Dak Prescott and Jake Ferguson still had it going on when they were playing together. In 3 games that they played together, 70 yards 3 times, 4 games at least 11.9 PPR points. There was only 1 game without Prescott that Ferguson reached 40 yards. And with the backup quarterback, Cooper Rush, Ferguson had less than 25 yards in 5 of 7 games. In my mind, Anthony, this was completely Cooper Rush. Dak Prescott has always featured the tight end. As the roster is set today, I believe Ferguson is still the number 2 option in the passing game behind CeeDee Lamb. I do think Jalen Tolbert, which we'll talk at later in the offseason, I do think he has ability to move into something else. But knowing Prescott, knowing Ferguson, and knowing this offense, Ferguson's going to smash that ADP. What do you think?
Yeah, and from when I talk to others in the industry, they're out on Jake Ferguson. And I don't understand why, because all the reasons why you like Jake Ferguson last year, you should like him this year, if not more. Yes, the rapport with Dak Prescott. Yes, Dak's history with the tight end position. Yes, the Cowboys defense probably going to be bad. They're going to have to throw and score. I also think if you look at this Cowboys offensive line, there's been a lot of turnover. Zach Martin retired. It's going to be a work in progress. So why does that impact Jake Ferguson? Dak Prescott's going to have to drop back and get rid of the football. I think Jake Ferguson's going to be the prime benefactor of that rebuilding offensive line. So if you're in a PPR league, tight end premium, Jake Ferguson's one of the best values on the board.
Let's not gloss over that. You mentioned the offensive line is not good. And when you have an offensive line that's not protecting, you got to get that ball out. Where's the sight line? It's usually the middle of the field. Yep. Well, where does Ferguson live? Middle of the field. The sight line goes naturally as a pressure beater. And Ferguson has the full trust of Dak Prescott. Yeah. So I'm glad you said that, because that point shouldn't get lost on those who are following this, that's a big benefit to Ferguson. And also CeeDee Lamb, who plays a lot in the slot too, because that'll probably be ramped up even more as the line's bad, because the last thing you want is to have a lot of long developing plays on the outside, because that doesn't end up working well. Hey, be a part of the RotoWire community on their new and improved Discord server. You share fantasy advice, share a prop bet detail, interact with some of your favorite RotoWire experts. You just join the conversation at rotowire.com/chat. Let's try it again. rotowire.com/chat, not chat. Chat. All right. RotoWire covers all the fantasy sports. You name it, we've got it. Baseball, I still say we have the best baseball coverage on the planet. You can get a free 2-day trial. You don't even need a credit card. Head on over to rotowire.com/pod. Check us out. We hope you like what you see and join the team. But if not, you lost nothing by taking a look. We want to thank our sponsors, Pool Genius and Edge Boost. We want to thank you for listening. Come back next week for another edition of the RotoWire Fantasy